As normal, please, reporters and media organizations, if you still need to get permission to record, please indicate in the chat. And if you have any questions, please list those questions, list your, that you want to ask a question, who you want to direct that question to, and what media organization you are with. With that said, I am going to turn it over to the county executive for opening remarks. Mr. County Executive.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again for joining me. Hopefully you may notice there's an improvement in my audio quality. I have a better microphone, so hopefully that helps a little bit. This past weekend, our nation was subjected to yet another horrible mass shooting that targeted families in a suburb outside of Chicago during a 4th of July parade. And that shooting left 7 people dead and close to 50 with gunshot wounds. The assailant was armed with a high-powered rifle like an AR-15 that he purchased legally. One of the lasting images of this attack are those empty folding chairs left on the parade route as a visual reminder of a horrible attack on a day when communities across this country gathered at parades and fireworks to celebrate our nation. In fact, there were more than 220 people who died and 570 people who were shot nationally over the 4th of July weekend, according to the Gun Violence Archive. This is America in 2022, and another call for our nation to pass real gun control measures. I think, like a lot of you, I don't know what it's going to take to get Congress to take this seriously and do the things they need to do. A gun control bill was passed by Congress and signed by President Biden, and it's a start, but so much more needs to be done to protect our communities, especially in wake of the Supreme Court ruling last month that will enable more individuals to be armed in public. I do hope that our Attorney General defends Maryland's current sensible gun violence prevention laws until the courts say they are unconstitutional. I think Governor Hogan's action yesterday was premature, which is going to enable the state to stop enforcing concealed permit laws, concealed carry permit laws. And that's unnecessary. And it's something we ought to be avoiding for as long as we possibly can. I cannot imagine why anybody would want to make it easier for somebody to walk down the street with a concealed gun who has no purpose. They're not somebody carrying bank deposits to their bank. They're not somebody, who's a high profile person who has to worry about their public safety. This step removes legitimate reasons that a person should need to have a gun, as opposed to just allowing pretty much anybody to carry one. I think we're going to rue the day that this happened. And I'm just really deeply distressed that we would be accelerating it instead of doing everything we can to fight it. From 2010 to 2019, overall death rate from guns in Maryland increased by 15%, and the firearms homicide rate increased by 31%. These statistics do not include the current uptick in shootings and homicides that have occurred in just the past 3 years. The answer to this problem is not more guns and less laws against concealing them. The answer to this is fewer guns and greater protections to make sure the people who don't need it and shouldn't have a handgun in their possession, that they're not able to get it. Thankfully, we didn't have any violent incidents over the 4th of July weekend celebrations in Montgomery County, but twice in the past week, Montgomery County police officers and others have been fired on. The first was following a reported burglary in Rockville. The suspects hit a police car with gunfire as they fled and eventually crashed. And on Monday, a man with a high-powered weapon shot 4 people, including a police officer, a police recruit, and a WSSC employee near Germantown Road and Frederick Road. Again, no one was hit by gunfire, and the only person hurt in this situation was the suspect that flipped his car in a police chase, and he was apprehended in Virginia. But that's 2 incidents that are way too close to home, and just a reminder of what an awful problem it is with the availability of guns in our streets. Tomorrow, I'm going to be joining Governor Hogan here in Rockville as we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Montgomery County Police Department. This is one of the most important events for MCPD's centennial celebration. At the event, we're going to be unveiling the time capsule from the 75th anniversary, and we'll be burying a new time capsule for the 100th anniversary. The commemorative ceremony will take place at the Red Brick Courthouse in downtown Rockville, in the same location where the first 6 police officers were sworn in 100 years ago. I know there's been a lot of noise, not much news on the SCOTUS security issue. One responsibility of the federal government that MCPD is assisting with is in security surrounding Supreme Court justices who reside in Montgomery County, Maryland. We are assisting the marshals who are in charge of providing security. Over the holiday weekend, we were notified by the media that the marshal of the Supreme Court sent me, Governor Hogan, along with leaders in Virginia, a letter about security of Supreme Court justices. This letter was never sent to my office, but to the email account of the Public Information Office at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, 10 hours after the Washington Post wrote about the letter and before others in the media had the letter. In this email, it noted that this letter was mailed to us on Friday. We still have not officially received this letter in the mail yet. As I said in our statement over the weekend, it is very troubling that the court would take this approach. If the marshal is concerned about security, then she and her staff should communicate directly with our police chief, myself, and my staff rather than having a letter released to the press. When it comes to the safety, security, and legal rights and protections of Montgomery County residents, it's more appropriate to have direct conversations and discussions and not through the media. Moreover, I checked with Police Chief Marcus Jones, and he's not aware of any requests from the federal government for additional security assistance. Discussing security concerns of justices, their families, and their neighbors through the media is actually irresponsible and pretty disappointing. Possibly the last thing a person who would do, who's concerned about someone's safety, would to be put those concerns out in public and telegraph that you're concerned about public safety protection. Not a smart thing to do. If the court majority thinks these theatrics will distract people from their shredding of the Constitution, they don't understand how seriously we take our rights. In Montgomery County, we're following the law that provides security and respects the First Amendment rights of protesters. That is what we do, regardless of the subject of the protests. The officers of the Montgomery County Police Department have been doing a great job balancing these competing demands. Primary responsibility for the safety of the Supreme Court justices and their families lies with the federal government. Under federal laws, the marshals can arrest an individual who is in violation of a federal law. I look forward to any discussion of these issues with Marshal Curley, and I hope that in the future she chooses to pick up the phone and call me instead of informing the media first. Montgomery County has quickly become the hub of pandemic protection and response activity, with vaccines fighting COVID originating here, and the exciting announcement earlier this year that the Global Pandemic Prevention and Biodefense Center would be located here in Montgomery County. Last month, Novavax, located in Gaithersburg, announced an expansion of production of their COVID-19 vaccine as they were authorized around the globe, including our country. I'm excited to share this week that I transferred a resolution to the council to ensure that Novavax continues to grow in Gaithersburg. Working with the state of Maryland, we've secured a financial commitment from the county and state of $5 million to help Novavax expand over the next decade. Novavax plans to use the money for an approximate $43 million two-part expansion project that will see the company's workforce grow nearly tenfold within the decade. Currently, the biotechnology company is home to 72,000 square feet of lab space and employs 142 people. The first phase of this expansion will add 120 square feet to the manufacturing capacity and 586 workers. The second phase of expansion will add another 120,000 square feet of lab space and create another 444 jobs. This deal is important for Montgomery County. It's a milestone, and for Novavax, which is called Montgomery County Home for nearly 30 years. I'm excited to see what headlines this company continues to generate, and I'm proud that Montgomery County is the place they call home. I want to talk a little bit about tax burdens in the region. We hear a lot of from people talking about, tax rates and some anecdotal comparisons of Montgomery County to other jurisdictions. And I just wanted to set the record straight. There was a report released by the DC government that measures tax burdens on households around the region. I was pleased to see that Montgomery County has the second lowest tax burden in the region for all 5 income levels for 8 jurisdictions in the region. That's pretty significant. Those jurisdictions are District of Columbia, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Alexandria, Arlington County, Fairfax County, Fairfax City, and Falls Church. So we're the second lowest in terms of tax burden. And the DC government also released their most recent report measuring business tax burden. And in that case, Montgomery County ranked as having the lowest tax burden for both small and large businesses. I know it doesn't fit with the popular narrative, but this is reality. And it would be really, good if people focused on what's real here instead of inventing numbers that don't exist. But it's important for people to realize Montgomery County is friendly for its residents, and it's actually business friendly when it comes to taxes. This week, a new portal for filing complaints against police officers in Montgomery County is now available through the Montgomery County government website, montgomerycountymd.gov/PAB. This is important news and a much easier way to report a concern. Written complaints will also be accepted if they're mailed to the county executive's office. The newly formed Police Accountability Board, or PAB, will oversee complaints filed against Montgomery County Police Department, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, City of Gaithersburg Police Department, City of Tacoma Park Police Department, City of Rockville Police Department, and the Village of Chevy Chase Police Department and their officers. The 9-person PAB was selected by my office and confirmed by the County Council last month. One of the PAB's first tasks would be rounding out the Administrative Charging Committee, or the ACC, which will evaluate complaints that come from the public. The ACC will hold hearings on complaints they find credible. The ACC will consist of 5 members, Christopher Jennison, Andrea McCoy Johnson, who were both selected by me, PAB Chairman Paul Walker or his appointee, and 2 others that have yet to be selected by the PAB members. One important role for these new groups will be working with law enforcement agencies to review, provide policy advice, and report on disciplinary matters stemming from public complaints about misconduct. They'll also hold quarterly meetings with directors of one or more of the law enforcement agencies here in the county and review the outcomes of disciplinary matters in the name of police oversight. I want to thank these appointees for their time, and I wish them all the best as they work to better our community. As for our COVID-19 update this week, case rates continue to hover between 200 and 250 cases per 100,000 residents, which is where we've remained now for the past month. We do expect an uptick in reported cases following a holiday weekend, when many of our residents test themselves after being at gatherings and parties with one another. Our hospitalization rates are also remaining steady and have slightly dropped this week to 6.3 admissions per 100,000 residents, which might not sound high, but with our hospitals still severely understaffed, I hope these numbers continue to decline week over week. Also, it's important to note that our BA.4 and BA.5 subvariants are now the majority of the types of cases we're seeing throughout this region. This is significant as there are still outstanding questions about our immunity to these new strains. This is another reminder on why our booster efforts are so important, especially since it's been over a year for most of our fully vaccinated population since their last shot. We received 60% of our fully vaccinated, we recently went over 60% of our fully vaccinated 12-year-old and plus population, 80% of our 65-year and older population to receive their first booster. These rates are 10 percentage points higher than national vaccine rates in both categories, but I would like to see them all increase since these vaccines have waning immunity. In more good news, Montgomery County leads the state in the number of children 6 months to 5-year-olds that have gotten their first vaccination to protect them from COVID. This should not be a surprise. We've consistently led the nation and the state in our vaccination and booster rates. Close to 5,000 kids got their vaccine in just the first few days. That's more than 3 times as many as the closest county in Maryland, which is Howard County. Thanks again to our HHS department and staff for a smooth start to our vaccine clinics aimed at young children. The number of infants and toddlers vaccinated so far still account for less than 10% of those who are now eligible in that group. And we have plenty of vaccine supplied now, and we can take both walk-ins again and appointments at our clinics and health offices. We have a lot of children left to vaccinate, and we know that this age group, we are facing more hesitancy and questions than ever before. I want to thank the parents who vaccinated their youngest children, and I encourage all parents to talk to their pediatrician or HHS department with any questions they may have about the vaccines. I also want to note that the government has moved forward in encouraging the introduction of vaccines that are tailored toward Omicron. I know that both Pfizer and Moderna have vaccines that they're preparing that are based on Omicron, and that would have a greater effect, they believe, on the current variants, which have descended a long way from the original form of Omicron that infected the world. And so these new vaccines could help provide additional protection, and hopefully we'll see them getting approved at the end of July or sometime in August. And Moderna's already announced that they're producing, so that when they are approved, they'll be able to immediately provide vaccines for use in the public. And finally, we often mention our death rate is only 2/3 of the national average, and we have reduced deaths in Montgomery County from 1,104 in 2020 to 624 in 2021. However, through the first 6 months of 2022, COVID has killed 315 people here, putting us on a pace to lose more individuals to COVID this year than we did last year, despite having a higher vaccination rate. For many people, life seems normal again. After more than 2 years since COVID appeared, this past weekend, we were able to celebrate our first 4th of July fireworks together again. I have to say that there was a moment of nervousness in all this, because I remember the first year we were preparing in May for the possible doing of 4th of July, and that didn't happen. And last year, we thought there was going to be a drop in cases, and we were thinking about, could we do 4th of July? And neither of those panned out. And so anytime we approach 4th of July with COVID around, there's a cause for some trepidation. But our numbers held, good enough that we were able to celebrate the 4th again. And it was great to be out in public, and it was great to see so many happy people gathering, barbecuing, dancing, all the things that happened that night. And we had 2 really good celebrations that I went to, one at Einstein in Wheaton the day before, 2 actually on the 2nd, and then for the 4th of July fireworks up in Germantown. Unfortunately, the reality is that COVID is still out there, and it's making some people very sick. And we still know that vaccines have been a huge help in keeping COVID patients out of intensive care or worse, but catching COVID can still be a threat to your long-term health. And you've heard me talk about these concerns a few times, the impacts and the importance of long COVID. I'm glad that we have Dr. Parham joining us today on the media briefing. As a pulmonologist, he is seeing firsthand the impact of COVID on his patients and throughout our communities. I look forward to hearing his presentation. But first, let me turn this over to Sean, Earl, and Dr. Bridgers.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Good afternoon. So to go through our updated pulse report, I know the county executive has touched on some of the key elements. To quickly reiterate, we are in a place where we have seen the declining numbers of the BA2 and the BA2.12 virus going throughout our community. Now, like much of the nation, we are seeing predominantly BA4 and BA5 infections occurring in Montgomery County. So we're tracking on this. We are hoping, Any variant right now that is of note and that's going through our community is a variant that is causing some breakthroughs. We have a high rate of immunity from vaccinations as well as from infections. The literature continues to show that vaccinations are more effective, especially staying up to date at preventing virus. So we continue to look at this, and with each new variant, hope that there is still some protection from this immunity, and it continues to keep serious illness suppressed. Looking globally, we have seen across the world, there is some increase in COVID activity. We, of course, track many of the places in Europe as good precursors for what we might see. Again, this COVID activity that was much lower than the initial Omicron activity that occurred earlier in the year. Again, looking at other states, we see that after declines in places like Massachusetts and New York, some of whom had the BA2 slightly before us, there's now been a leveling and consistent COVID activity, much like we have been seeing in our county. Just want to again reiterate that even though we have a small number of unvaccinated individuals in our county, that the rate of infection, even now into June, still remains significantly higher than those who are fully vaccinated. And for many of those individuals, that means a higher rate of reinfection. So again, we are strongly trying to get the message out there that the vaccines, even with breakthrough cases, the vaccines are helping to cut down on the number of, on the rate of infection versus not being vaccinated. Within our hospitalization rates, again, we've had a bit of a plateau after they started to come down. We'll continue to track these numbers again after a holiday weekend. Even when you're not in a pandemic, often hospitalization rates bounce up a little bit, but they have been a bit level for the last few weeks. We again are hoping these will start to come back down to the earlier baseline levels. Again, just tracking not only cases, but hospitalizations and death rates by vaccination status. Again, we're seeing those rates much higher in our unvaccinated populations, and we keep wanting to get the message out there how important it is not only to be vaccinated, but to stay up to date on those vaccinations. Again, we're happy to hear that our boosters and additional doses, our rates for both the 12 plus and the 65 plus have now crossed the 60 and 80% percentile. Of course, for the 50 plus, and for those who are immunocompromised, they're now eligible for a second booster. And we've seen many of them come out for that second booster. Even for now, the 5 to 11s, many of them are eligible and have started to get their booster shot as well. Again, we've seen most of those families with 5 to 11-year-olds come out and get vaccinations. And we're starting to get our first returns of the county-wide vaccination totals. These are getting released. These numbers are being updated weekly by our Maryland Department of Health and CDC partners. We just want to remind our community that we'll continue to do those infant and toddler vaccinations primarily on the weekends. So you can see we have a Wednesday evening clinic at New Hampshire Estates Elementary School, but we'll be at a number of high schools and middle schools on Saturday and Sunday. And we'll have both Moderna at many of these clinics, and at least one of the clinics will have Pfizer as well. We do have both vaccines, and we want to make sure these are both available to the community. Again, you can see from our data that we're starting to see in this lower chart, we're starting to see our under 5 first dose individuals come out. Obviously, this is a smaller group by population than the 5 to 11-year-olds, which is about double the population. However, the turnout is less initially than we saw with 5 to 11s. And this has happened with each age group as you go down. A smaller percentage comes out initially. But as you've seen from our numbers, over time, those 5 to 11 populations were brought out to get their vaccinations. We hope that'll happen at this age group. We think some of the slower rollout is likely because a larger number of parents are electing to go to pediatricians, and it can take a little longer to schedule those appointments. Moving on from COVID, we just wanted to mention our public health services are also tracking the monkeypox infections that are occurring across the nation, as well as in Maryland. We continue to work with our state partners on this. The Maryland Department of Health does have the lead in doing those investigations, and the local health departments partner with them when an exposure or a contact is identified in those jurisdictions. The state is not releasing the specific jurisdictions these are occurring right now, but just to update our community, on June 28th, the White House announced that they were going to significantly increase the vaccine that can be protective against these viruses and the distribution throughout the nation. And the state is working with those local health departments to ensure that that vaccine is available locally to high-risk exposures. What we are aware of is that the initial vaccine quantities will be very limited, but over time, these quantities will expand. We are working within our disease control offices to identify the high-risk exposures in our community. And then once those are identified, provide the vaccine when it comes into us, provide that vaccine to those communities. Currently, it's a very conservative listing of those individuals with confirmed and presumed monkeypox exposures, including those who had close physical contact with a diagnosed monkeypox case, those who know their sexual partner was diagnosed with monkeypox, and currently men who have sex with men, who have recently had multiple sex partners in a venue where there is known to be a monkeypox case or in an area where monkeypox is spreading. So again, we'll work with our state partners to identify when we have potential exposures in our community. We're working closely again with our neighboring jurisdictions, including the District of Columbia, to understand how they're rolling out their vaccine. And we'll work with the communities that may fall into these categories to identify them when vaccine is available. And finally, we just, again, we do the usual case investigations in coordination with the healthcare community. Notifications have gone out to all of the providers in Maryland to help them understand about screening and identification, and then when to contact the health department for additional investigation and testing, and potentially for that post-exposure prophylaxis. So again, we just wanted to update our community on the protective actions that are occurring within the county. At this time, I wanted to ask if Dr. Stoddard had any additional comments that he'd like to expand on.
I'll just double down on something that Mr. O'Donnell has alluded to. Right now, the monkeypox virus quantities are the vaccine quantities are very limited. You cannot, just because you want to get a monkeypox vaccination, just come in and get one. Just I want to be very clear about that. If you fall into the categories that Sean alluded to, you know, obviously those are those targets. Those targets will expand as more vaccine becomes available, but initially it will be a very limited rollout. I just want to make that very clear.
And I just wanted to say, if we have anyone who's listening who believes they may have signs or symptoms of monkeypox or were exposed to monkeypox, the correct thing to do is to contact your primary care provider, and they will help you evaluate very quickly, help you evaluate that risk. And if they believe it is a risk, they will get in contact with the health department.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Bridgers, to introduce Dr. Parham.
So thank you, Mr. Hudson. It is my public health pleasure to introduce Dr. William Parham III. Dr. Parham is a triple boarded physician such that in internal medicine, pulmonary medicine, and intensive care medicine, who took care of COVID patients in the intensive care unit during the height of the pandemic, and has been on the front line in many healthcare settings regarding COVID. He is also a medical expert who can articulate and discuss the general impact of long COVID, as well as its impact on our minority populations. Thank you, Dr. Parham, for joining the County Executive's COVID-19 briefing today. And without further delay, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. Mr. Chief Executive, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As was said earlier, my name is Dr. William Parham. I'm an internist, a pulmonologist, and critical care physician. And I'd like to discuss with you today, as I've been requested to do, some of the aspects of long COVID. Let me share my screen to provide you with a brief slide deck that would help facilitate our discussion. Let me just ask a question now. Are you able to see the screen? It says long COVID at the top.
Yes.
Yes, as we are.
All right, very good. As I think the way to frame our discussion is first just to look at it, take a very brief review of COVID. I want to emphasize of long COVID. I want to emphasize that this is a very brief review because over the past year, the literature regarding this has literally exploded. It was a fairly late recognition of long COVID as a syndrome that occurred after acute COVID. And so the initial reports were somewhat anecdotal. And I think that there was not necessarily a rapid recognition within the healthcare community that this was a real syndrome, apart and distinct from what had previously been recognized. But suffice it to say, during the year or so in which long COVID has been recognized as a distinct entity, the actual knowledge has grown exponentially, as I said, but unfortunately, the amount of information that we have about it is woefully inadequate, and to a certain extent is disappointing. Disappointing in the sense that what we have is now a constellation of symptoms that occurs after COVID that we are struggling to get a handle on. There are reasons why we're struggling. I'll go into some of those in just a moment. I think the way to begin is just to define what is long COVID. And I think the definition is fairly straightforward, although not as specific as we would like. But basically, long COVID is defined as a recurrence or persistence of COVID-related symptoms for 4 weeks or longer following the initial COVID infection or illness. Recurrence or persistence of COVID symptoms for 4 weeks or longer after the COVID infection or illness has appeared. This long COVID goes by multiple names. Long COVID, in a sense, is kind of a vernacular name, but is also known as post-acute COVID, long haul COVID, chronic COVID, or most recently, post-acute sequelae of COVID. There are many more monikers as well, but those are a few that I think that have entered into the popular discourse. I think the best way to frame the limited time we have available is to look at 5 common frequently asked questions regarding long COVID. Those being, what are the symptoms? Who is at risk? Are minority populations disproportionately affected? What is the treatment? And can it be prevented? I think that these 5 questions can help frame our discussion for the next several minutes. So the first question is, what are the symptoms? And the symptoms can be legion. Actually, I saw a report 2 or 3 days ago that said over 200 symptoms have been reported to be as part of the syndrome of long COVID. The most common symptoms, however, are severe weakness, prolonged fatigue, shortness of breath, and mental fog. The severe weakness can be profound, There are people who, with the syndrome, become so weak that they're basically not able to engage in their activities of daily living without assistance, dressing, brushing their teeth, simply standing, simply walking. This weakness can be profound. The fatigue can be profound as well, that these are individuals who may not be particularly weak, but once they arise from the chair or couch to initiate any regular activity, they find themselves extremely fatigued after just a very brief exertion. This exertion can also be associated with shortness of breath, particularly those who had severe shortness of breath as a prominent symptom during their acute COVID illness. And these symptoms can also occur against the background of mental fog, which is just difficulty in thinking, difficulty in judgment, and sometimes difficulty in just remembering what to do to carry out basic activities. One of my very close friends actually had to put a list on his bathroom mirror just to remind him of the sequence in which he needed to go through in order simply to shave. So the mental fog can be profoundly disorienting, and unfortunately, it's one of the more common symptoms. These four symptoms, weakness, fatigue, shortness of breath, and mental fog, are probably the most disabling symptoms when they occur in the long COVID syndrome. But as I said, there are over 200 symptoms that have been reported, and any organ system can be affected with these other symptoms: the kidneys, lung, heart, brain, skin, GI tract. The symptoms are somewhat difficult to ascribe to long COVID because they're non-specific. For example, there's a real overlap of long COVID symptoms with the symptoms of mental depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic fatigue syndrome, and a number of other syndromes as well. So sometimes it's difficult to distinguish in a person who's had COVID whether they now have symptoms of long COVID syndrome or whether or not they have one of the other syndromes that may have been present actually even prior to their bout of COVID, such as depression or PTSD. It's also the case that the duration of these symptoms is variable. Symptoms can last for weeks, months, or sometimes even years, although fortunately, most people ultimately do recover. So those are a synopsis of the symptoms that occur that characterize long COVID. The second question is, who is at risk? And the answer is anyone who has been infected with the COVID virus is at risk for developing long COVID, even if that person had no acute symptoms. Meaning that even if a person just has a positive COVID test, but no symptoms whatsoever and doesn't become sick, that person still is at risk for developing long COVID syndrome. Long COVID is more common after a severe illness rather than a mild illness, and it's more common in people who are not vaccinated compared to people who are vaccinated. Unfortunately, as do many other morbidities, it is very common among persons age 65 or older, and it's also present in higher rates in people who smoke tobacco, who heavily consume alcohol, or who have a substance abuse disorder. And it certainly has a higher attack rate in people with underlying health conditions developed prior to COVID, such as cancer, COPD, HIV, diabetes, or obesity. The third question is, are minorities disproportionately affected? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. Compared to white populations, some minority populations are more likely to be hospitalized for acute COVID. Among the Black population, 2.3 times as likely to be hospitalized. Among the Hispanic population, 2.2 times more likely to be hospitalized. And among the American Indian population, at least 3 times more likely to be hospitalized. And being hospitalized for COVID is a marker for severe COVID. And as we alluded to previously, severe COVID is a marker for developing long COVID. So since these populations are more likely to develop severe illness, as evidenced by their higher rates of hospitalization, they're also more likely to develop long COVID syndrome. The fourth question is, what is the treatment? Unfortunately, there's no specific treatment for long COVID. The available treatments can focus on management of symptoms, particularly the symptoms we talked about earlier, the fatigue, weakness, the shortness of breath, and the mental fog, but there's no specific treatment for long COVID. Fortunately, in a sense, most people do recover, but the period of recovery may be long, and the recovery itself may not be complete. Fifth question is, can it be prevented? No, there's no guarantee that long COVID can be prevented. Your best defense is to protect yourself from getting COVID. The way to do that is with the vaccination, distancing, and mask wearing. Things that we've heard so much about because they're so important, and particularly as cases and illness begins to rise, and will continue to rise during the summer and the fall months. It's important, just once again, to be vigilant and to make sure that one's vaccinations are up to date, that one has obtained the appropriate boosters, that whenever possible, particularly in groups of people with whom you're unfamiliar, to distance when possible, and to wear masks when appropriate, as guided by guidance from the Montgomery County Health Department or this in partnership with the Centers for Disease Control. In summary, long COVID is persistent or recurrent symptoms for 4 or more weeks after an acute COVID infection or illness. The symptoms range from mild to debilitating. Multiple organ systems can be affected. Minority populations are disproportionately affected, and unfortunately, there's no specific treatment. Most people recover, but the recovery may be incomplete, and the best defense is prevention. I will now turn this back over to Dr. Bridges to facilitate questions, and we'll do our best to provide good answers.
Thank you, Dr. Parham. I will turn it over to Mr. Hudson for the Q&A session of the county executive's briefing this afternoon. Mr. Hudson.
Button. All right. Thank you both. Thank you all for your comments today. We'll now open the floor up to questions. Remember, reporters, if you do have a question, please make sure that you put it in the chat, indicate who you want to address the question to and your news organization. I believe the first question we have right now in the chat is from Kyle Peterson. Mr. Peterson, go ahead with your question, please. Mr. Peterson? Hello? Hello? We'll come back to you so you can get your sound together. Mr. Peterson, are you back in? Are you in now? Okay. We'll come back to him. Next question is from Stephanie Ramirez from Fox 5.
Hey, Barry, thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. One on topic and one off topic, if I may. For the on topic, why the conversation on long COVID now?
So good afternoon, Stephanie. I'll take that question. The county executive has actually asked for information specific to long COVID as well as in minority populations. We've also had some comparative studies on the impact of long COVID in our pediatric population prior to us beginning our pediatric campaign. So it's been out there. He asked our public health team to contact an expert and join him this afternoon as we continue to not only respond to COVID through our vaccination effort, but recover from COVID. So that's was the CE's request.
Thank you. And then for the county executive, off-topic question. It was about 6 months ago that we learned from county leaders there was a task force to address the increase of violence in the downtown Silver Spring area. We are reporting on a more violent carjacking that happened yesterday regarding a woman who was dragged in her vehicle. I want to ask you, do you have any update on the state of affairs and where crime is in the downtown area? And is there any conversation or discussion in bringing back the auto, the auto theft carjacking task force that was reportedly removed or defunded by your office?
So it was neither removed nor defunded. The officers were reassigned to the stations because the police chief, I didn't make this decision out of thin air, because the police chief thought it'd be better to put the officers in the stations rather than having a centralized task force. If he believes after what we've seen that it makes sense to reassemble this group as a task force and take the people out of the stations, I'm not going to object to that. But this was a decision that he made about what he thought was the best way to handle the auto theft issue. So, I guess I understand your question, but since I didn't invent this solution, I'm happy to follow the advice of the chief if he feels that he needs to make some changes. I will say that in general, we've gotten, I'd say, pretty good comments about changes in Silver Spring that have come from the increased enforcement there. We're doing a lot with cameras. We're doing a lot with license plate cameras. There is clearly an upgraded presence of police, and there's an upgraded presence of supports for people who don't need police help, but definitely need help. And I don't know if Dr. Stoddard wants to add anything to that, but we feel we're making progress. And, I think our comments that we've heard from the business community is they feel we've been making progress.
Yeah, I'll add, we have continued the Silver Spring Task Force. I've been convening that on a regular basis. Actually, we have, a meeting scheduled for next week just to continue following up on that already. We've been out, actually, I was out at 3 o'clock in the morning about 3 weeks ago to observe with our police department on site some of the things that they're seeing overnight. We receive regular reports about things that are happening in the downtown Silver Spring area. The data actually suggests, and Commander McBain has shown this to our Silver Spring Community Advisory Board, that the crime numbers are actually improving. I'm knock on wood, I'm cautious to even say this, we haven't had a homicide in downtown Silver Spring this year, which is we want homicides we want them to be at zero, and they are at zero, which is great in the downtown Silver Spring area. And I think that's in large part due to some, not just the work of our police department, which has been incredible, but also been a collaborative effort with businesses, with our enforcement agencies. And so we are seeing improvements in the crime statistics. Now, you don't measure crime statistics over 3 or 4 or 5 month periods. You measure them over longer periods because you need to see that your downward trends are sustained downward trends and not just blips on the radar. And so while we are encouraged by the progress, we're not resting on our laurels. We're going to continue to make the efforts that the county executive has directed us to make collaboratively with our business community. And as the county executive alluded to, we're hearing positive feedback from our businesses. Now, the carjacking that happened yesterday was very violent. Those individuals were arrested in DC where they fled. And so obviously, that shows part of the work that our police do. It's not just, I think that was Prince George's County Police Department helicopter supported the arrest that occurred in the district. And so that shows the regionality of the collaboration that we have to provide to prevent these crimes. And so we're not in all cases going to be able to prevent every crime, but when crimes do occur, our police are acting very swiftly to make arrests in Montgomery County and particularly in downtown Silver Spring. So the collaboration that we've stood up is working in large part, but that doesn't mean it's there isn't more that we can look to do as we look at these crimes. As the county executive said, if we see that we need to have a centralized task force in addition to regional task force, that's something that the police chief certainly should bring forward, and we'll talk to him about.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Next question is from WUSA 9. I don't know who will be actually asking the question.
All right, Scott Broom, how are you?
Hi, Scott. How are you?
Great. The briefing on long COVID, much appreciated, doctors. Thanks for joining us. I am, however, assigned on another subject today. The county executive made himself clear about how he feels how the Marshal of the Supreme Court handled things. I wanted to ask Mr. County Executive, and noting that it was Montgomery County Police that reacted to the Kavanaugh threat. So the county in that situation was certainly fulfilling its role. What can protesters expect? I mean, the Marshal of the Supreme Court wants local governments essentially to enforce these anti-picketing laws. That's the upshot of the letter. What's your message to people who might want to protest in a place like Chevy Chase or Potomac at a Supreme Court justice's home. Can they expect to be arrested by local police?
That is not the desire of the local police, and it's not the desire of the police chief. What they will be is, though, they should expect to be told to keep moving, to not, have loud, boisterous, and disruptive demonstrations, that, they can peacefully gather, they can, express their view, but they can do it in a way that doesn't become disruptive and doesn't become dangerous for people. And the chief's been very clear about that. And, they've done, I think, a good job of managing it. I was told that last Wednesday night, there was a somewhat different group and a larger group that was there, but the police have been working with them, and we're hopeful that should this return again tonight, that they'll be following a set of rules that'll keep the thing, hopefully, it shouldn't become confrontational, and it doesn't become something that becomes messy. Nobody wants to arrest anybody. We want them to be able to express what we think is their right to express without becoming disruptive about it.
I haven't had a chance to talk to Chief about it, but what are your thoughts about what the threshold for an arrest of a citizen protesting might be at a Supreme Court justice's residence or nearby?
I think the starting point is probably if you cross onto somebody's property and don't get off of it. No one needs to wait and figure out what you intend to do at that point. I think that's the starting point. I think everything else depends on how disruptive it is. I dare not try to set out a measure of disruptiveness, but I've been at demonstrations that are kind of quiet vigils and quiet assemblages, and I've been at demonstrations that are noisy. And I think in a neighborhood, we're expecting these to be on the less noisy, less disruptive side of things.
What are your thoughts about the balance between protest and the political environment, the historical environment we're in right now, and the balance between protests and law enforcement in a situation like this?
Well, I think all you got to do is look at Putin's Russia and get an idea of where you don't want to go. This idea where people can't gather together, and if you gather together, you're going to be arrested and take that. It's not happening here. And we need to make sure that people don't use protests as an excuse for silencing opposition. Freedom of speech is, pretty long cherished American right. And, we need to protect it. But at the same time, people have to realize that, speech is one thing. Trying to totally disrupt a neighborhood or disrupt somebody's life kind of crosses over into another area. And there's got to be a balance between the two. And I know the chief feels the same way about it because we've talked about this, and we're hoping that everybody else feels the same way. I mean, I've been at demonstrations where people peacefully hand themselves over to be arrested. If you want to make them, I can say myself, I was at the South African embassy. I walked up to the gates of the embassy. We stood there. The police said, are you going to move? We said no. We got arrested. But all that transpired without anything more than just making the statement that we were willing to get arrested at the embassy. If people want to get arrested in a peaceful manner, there's a way to do that. But we don't want people arrested. We don't want them doing things that force us to arrest them. If they want to make that symbolic gesture, then there's a way to handle it. But I don't want to see that level of disruption. And I'm very unhappy with the justices and what they did. But we've got to figure out a way to keep things in a somewhat civil tone.
And finally,
can I have one point on this, Scott?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so obviously Montgomery County has been situated next to the District of Columbia for its entire existence. We've had protests in Montgomery County, political protests of all kinds for the country and the county's entire existence. And so obviously the instruction that has largely been provided to the police chief is operate in a manner consistent with the way we have traditionally done this for protests that have been at the county executive's house or have been in any other. We have a large number of appointed and elected officials from the federal government and have had such under Democratic presidents and administrations and Congresses, and under Republican presidencies and Congresses and Supreme Courts. So obviously we've got a long tenured experience with doing this, and candidly, it's not we've been trying to handle this in a manner consistent with the way we've done this for a very long time, because that's the way we believe we should operate.
Before I let you all go, I mean, I did make the point earlier, it doesn't go unnoticed that the Montgomery County Police are the ones that made the arrest and the significant Kavanaugh threat. Describe for me your position on the Montgomery County Police's role in protecting the justices as citizens of the county, and balance that with, you know, their special role and the special role of the Supreme Court Marshal's Office and other federal authorities to provide personal security. I think that's where this all gets muddied up. People have some idea that somehow local police are in charge of securing Supreme Court justices. And I know that you all would certainly, our police department would certainly step in to protect the safety of these individuals, but at the same time, not be sitting on a house providing security when the police department is short on staff covering the entire county. You get where I'm going. I'm just interested in your comments on that broadly.
Look, I think you actually framed it pretty well. I mean, our folks were the right people to respond to the threat on the officer, because the last thing you want to do is call the Supreme Court, call the federal marshals, and wait for them to arrive. We had the fastest response that anybody could have had to that threat, and so it was the right thing for us to do. Subsequent to that, the federal governments decided that they would put marshals around justices' houses, and that's an appropriate thing for them to do. And to the extent they need our assistance in security, which is what I thought that, you know, when I read the headline about the request from the court, I thought, oh, they wanted assistance with security. Did we have enough people there or whatever? It turns out they actually just don't want to have people protesting. But if we were told that, you know, we feel we need some additional backup or some additional services, I'm sure we'd provide additional backup and services if they're not able to do it. No one's saying you guys are on your own, and our people are there. But, you know, we're there for making sure we maintain the peace and we keep people moving, and the justice, you know, are primarily protected by the federal officials, and we work with them. So I think, you know, despite what that letter said, we actually have a working relationship, which makes the letter all the more disturbing, because nobody contacted anybody and said that we have this relationship, but you're not doing enough.
Thank you for taking the questions.
Thank you. We're going to loop back to Kyle Peterson, who got cut off earlier. I don't know if your mic is working now.
Mr. Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
So I'll just follow up with that on a couple things, because I've been trying to understand the local law permits parading through but not stopping at residences, and that's what the marshal is saying is happening, that they're stopping for up to 30 minutes at a time at houses. So I mean, why not enforce that? Is the county's view that that law is unenforceable for some reason? Is it that the protesters are not in violation of that law? Or is it just a matter of law enforcement discretion that you're choosing not to enforce that law?
I'll start if you like, Mr. County Executive. So generally speaking, well, first off, the Attorney General has raised questions about the law itself, the State Attorney General, number one. Number two, we are actually giving people warnings, telling them they have to move on. If they don't move on, they will be arrested. And so it is discretion being applied by the police department around how aggressive they feel they need to be to gain compliance with the individuals protesting. And so while I've seen the claims in the letter made by the marshals, I've actually not seen any direct evidence that people have been lingering there for 20 to 30 minutes. And when we talk to our police officers, they tell us it's not happening. So there seems to be a disagreement about the facts with regard between the marshal and our police department. And so obviously there is a balance here. They're trying to maintain it, allowing people to protest, but keeping them moving. They give warnings on occasion to allow people, hey, you're lingering too long, you need to move along. People are generally compliant. Candidly, many of the protesters or organizers of protesters are discussing what they can and cannot do with the police department, and the police department is giving them direction, and they are largely following it. Now, individuals within a single protest may choose not to follow things. They're given those warnings and told to move on. We've told the police, if people refuse to comply with your official orders, you can arrest them. There's been no guidance offered by anyone in the county executive's administration to not make arrests if people do not follow a lawful police order.
Understood. I guess the question is maybe it's a factual dispute. I mean, why isn't the lawful order, you can walk by this house with your signs, but you're not allowed to stop here and stand here and yell, which at least is what the marshal is claiming is happening. Does that question make sense?
Yes, it's just we don't have evidence that that's something other than what is supposed to be happening is happening.
And then I guess my second question is for the county executive. So the marshal has asked to enforce this law to prevent protests at the homes. And in your opening remarks, you said, quote, "If the court majority thinks these theatrics will distract people from their shredding of the Constitution, they don't understand how seriously we take our rights," unquote. And I guess I would ask, why bring politics and your view of the court's jurisprudence, presumably Roe v. Wade, into this conversation about security? I mean,
it's not about security, because it's not about security. When you get a message from the press office about security, you pretty much know it's not about security. If the office had come, if the message had been their security officials picking up a phone and calling our police and saying, we have a concern about security and we'd like additional help, that's one thing. That's not what they did.
So you don't think the marshal has good faith concerns about these gatherings in front of these houses?
Like I said, if I had a concern about public safety, I would not put it out in a press release and say, I don't think that I think these people have their safety jeopardized. I mean, I think it's about the worst thing you could do if you were concerned about somebody's safety. I mean, who are you telegraphing that to? That seemed to me to be just basically, kind of like theater, maybe a little bit of a response to the fact that we reacted pretty negatively to what the court decision was. But from a professional perspective, if you were concerned about public safety, we have people you can actually talk to about that. I'm sure Dr. Stoddard would be happy to take a call.
Well, sure, I understand that. I guess I'd just ask this last question. We're in a very heated political environment, and you have, again, in your opening remarks, you were decrying gun violence and the availability of these weapons. You had somebody on a roof over the 4th of July do something terrible. And do you not understand why the marshal of the Supreme Court is concerned about dozens, 50, 100, I don't know how many people standing outside these houses?
Then they should have a concrete discussion with the police about how to manage the crowd with their own resources, because they are there, in a way that maximizes protection of the justices. That's, in my mind, that's how you do this. If you have a question about safety, you raise it, you address it. You don't simply say, just don't let any protesters go there, because that's overkill. That's when people start losing their rights, when somebody can just say, I think this is just, outrageous that people are protesting and they could be dangerous. And all of a sudden people who could be dangerous get labeled as dangerous and they're barred from exercising their constitutional rights. There's a way to do this. And we're happy to work with them.
Well, sure. I mean, it is the law in Montgomery County, though, it appears, at least the law book that I was looking up online. But anyway, I thank you for your comments.
Okay.
All right. Next, we have Matthew. Is that Verdon? Are you still there, Matthew?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Sorry, I couldn't figure out the video component. I'm not a techno wizard. Can I ask my question now?
Sure.
Okay, it's to the county executive. I wanted to ask, what actual impact will Governor Larry Hogan's decision to stop enforcing the state's show cause handgun permitting system have on Montgomery County itself? I'm not really clear on what role, if any, the county plays in that permitting system. So perhaps you could explain.
Well, we don't play a role in the permitting system. The impact would be talking to people who've got permits for carry, you have to demonstrate a reason for a permit. Why do you think you're at risk? Why, you feel it's necessary to be able to carry a gun, and to get rid of the conditions and make it easy for a person to basically, without those kind of preconditions, assert they have a right to carry a weapon around with them. I think that's an invitation for serious trouble. I don't know how you feel about, people going into bars with guns strapped to them and then having a few drinks and then getting in an argument. It's one thing when these things end in a fight, those things are bad enough. It's another thing when they end in much worse than a fight. They end up with somebody deciding to pull a gun. Why would anybody in their right mind encourage people to walk around with guns? I don't get it. And it's a danger to everybody else. So it doesn't affect us in the sense it's not going to change what we do. We don't enforce that law. I couldn't write the law, even though I would love to write my own law. We don't have the ability to do that. And we're going to have to live with it. But I think you're going to see more violent actions by more angry people, and nobody's going to be safer. And people are going to die over things that maybe would have resulted in a bloody nose before this. This is not good public policy.
Okay, thanks.
All right, our next question is from Bethesda Beat. Not sure who's asking that question.
Hi, Barry. Dan Shear here. Mark, I was just taking a look at the statement from the state's attorney's office regarding extradition, not cooperating with extradition orders from other states that may criminalize out-of-state abortions. I guess this is sort of a hypothetical, but I was wondering, could you potentially have a situation where you have women coming from several other states in Maryland or Montgomery County seeking abortion here, and then they're afraid to go home to their home state because they're afraid of being criminally prosecuted? And if that's a concern, I guess, is that something you guys have kind of considered? And just any thoughts on that? I think you're muted.
I said, I'm concerned about women coming here and having an abortion and then being prosecuted back in their home state. I mean, I think one version of these insane laws would have that, if the child was conceived in the state, that the state has a right to, prosecute you wherever you go. I'm not going to enforce Texas law here. I mean, it's bad enough that you've got a law that is not universally, not even close to universally accepted, even on a moral basis. As I said to somebody else, I listened to a rabbi talk about it in the Jewish religion, life begins when they take the first breath. I mean, the idea that one group of religious people gets to assert what everybody else has to conform to, that's not a country of laws anymore. Then you're treading into the world of theocracy. I'm not interested in that. I don't think most county residents are interested in that.
Or just to kind of follow up, are there certain protections that the county would provide to women to ensure privacy? Or
I mean, if there were, I wouldn't tell you. Because I don't want, wouldn't want anybody to try to figure out workarounds. But one thing about the Maryland law is that doctors are going to be able, and nurses are going to be able to provide it. So it'll no longer be, let's sit outside the abortion clinic and see who goes inside. And, people go to doctors all the time. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult, and doctors aren't going to be required to share a HIPAA record, with somebody and say, oh yeah, this person came in here to get an abortion. And whatever we can do to block that, we'll do.
And one other point, so the county executive has submitted $1 million supplemental appropriation request to support abortion access services in Montgomery County, not just abortion, but sort of all the maternal child interactions, broadly, because we do not know where some of these other states are going to take their laws. And so we need the flexibility and the resources to respond in Montgomery County. We don't know what number of individuals may come from West Virginia, for example, to Montgomery County to seek an abortion, because we don't know what some of the draconian laws that are likely to be enacted in some other states are going to be. I expect this is going to be an arms race amongst very conservative states on who can be the most aggressive on abortion, and that may just have collateral impacts. That's part of the reason why we've, the county executive has restricted travel to those states, because we don't know if, for example, a county employee goes to a conference and conceives in that state, what does that put that employee at risk when they come back to Montgomery County? As the county executive said, there's lots of unintended and long-term consequences that we don't fully understand at this point, because we just don't understand how these very conservative states are going to react to this change in the Supreme Court's interpretation of rights.
Got it. Oh, just one more question. I know last week you had talked about, hoping that other jurisdictions take a similar position as far as restricting travel to those states. Do you know of any jurisdictions in the region at this point that have talked about doing that?
I haven't heard from anybody, but I will say I'm a bit busy doing other things other than following all the news in the world.
Thanks.
Scott has a follow-up question from his previous question. Real quick, Scott.
Sure. I actually put it in the chat. I didn't want to, but let me just ask. I'm just trying to be clear, because I'm unaware whether Montgomery County Police have been made any arrests related to protest or picketing, whether it's this anti-picketing ordinance that's in Maryland law or anything else. Are you all aware of any police activity that did result in arrests out there?
At least I actually was texting with Assistant Chief Parker Lone, so this answer comes directly from him. We have not, certainly as it relates to anything recent, I would say recent being the last year at the Justice's house, made any arrest to anti-picketing laws in that circumstance. Now, in the history of the county, I'm going to guess that at some point someone was cited, but I certainly do not know. We'd have to go back and do a more exhaustive search, but certainly not anything recent as it relates to the justices.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just want to be sure when I write this up, I accurately characterize what we have here. And my read back is that police have had a lot of engagements with people. Police have had a lot of discussions internally with themselves, with county administration about how to handle this. They've been engaging with people out there. They've been asking them to be cooperative, and that has not resulted in any arrests. And these protests have been able to continue respecting the First Amendment in the opinion of the county executive. Is that a pretty accurate read back of what the message I have here?
Mark, you?
Sounds pretty accurate. I mean, I think there were some people arrested at a climate protest. They did civil disobedience and they wanted to be arrested. But I think that was all prearranged, and you could ask the chief to verify that. But I have some vague memory about that happening at a protest.
I think there was climate change related protests in recent years where the individuals essentially told the police they wanted to be arrested. The police obliged that request and arrested them. They were issued citation and release. But I don't think those were picketing at the justice. No, that was totally unrelated.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stay focused on the
and so I have two additional updates for you. There were warnings issued to people on May 7th, and then last Monday, which was the 26th of June. There were warnings issued on those 2 dates, but the unlawful behavior ceased after the warnings were issued. I got that from Chief Parker Lone as well.
Okay. So
on any given night of protest, we have between 10 and 30 officers, depending on the size of the protests that are there. And I want to make clear, the county executive has previously said, like, obviously protesting in people's houses, to me, we're not encouraging it. We're certainly not necessarily, we're trying to balance these interests here. But obviously those officers, yes, they could be doing other things to promote public safety around the county. But obviously part of the role of government is to protect people's rights as well, meaning they have a right to protest. We have to make sure that the rights of the neighbors are respected. But obviously this is not something the county executive has encouraged, and we're balancing rights is what it comes down to.
understood, and appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the media? Going once, going twice, 3 times. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank our guests for being here. Also want to remind everyone that tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock is the commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Montgomery County Police Department. Please come out and join for this very special and certainly once in a lifetime celebration of our police department. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you back here next week.
Take care, everybody.